March the 30th, 2024, late evening Charleston Road, Dundee. Behind the door of an ordinary flat, a late-night visit would spiral into irreversible violence. Carri Stewart, once just another face in Dundee's streets, now stood at the center of a killing that would carry lifelong consequences. How could a former relationship, already ended, still hold such lethal power? This was not a spontaneous outburst of anger, but a deliberate confrontation that escalated into a punishment, beating, a hammer raised, threats spoken, and a final stab delivered straight to the heart. Inside Dundee's most brutal group attacks, when revenge turns fatal. Welcome to UK Real Crime, where Dundee's quiet streets whisper secrets, and those responsible are finally unmasked. Today, we examine the case of Carri Stewart and the fatal group attack on Charleston Road, uncovering how shared blame, addiction, and unresolved conflict combined to produce one of the city's most disturbing modern crimes. What you're about to hear may stay with you long after the story ends. First offender, Carri Stewart. March the 30th, 2024, Charleston Road, Dundee, Scotland. A late-night visit ended in violence inside a quiet flat, facing lifelong consequences. Carri Stewart was 44 years old. She lived in Dundee, Scotland, and was known to police as a prolific offender with a long history of convictions, including violence and assault. She lived within a drug-addicted lifestyle and associated with others who shared similar backgrounds. At the time of the offense, she was in a new relationship with Brian Miller. The victim, Stephen Hutton, was 43 years old. He was Stewart's former partner. The relationship had ended, but contact between them continued, placing him within her immediate social circle. Earlier on March the 30th, 2024, Stewart returned to her flat and found the door ajar. Items were missing, including prescribed pregabalin medication and a St. Christopher's necklace. Suspicion quickly turned to people known to her. After discussion with her new partner, Brian Miller, they blamed Stephen Hutton. Alcohol and drug use formed part of the background that evening, and as night fell, Stewart and 3 others decided to confront Hutton at his home. At around 11 o'clock in the evening, Stewart, with her accomplices Miller, Scott Henderson, and Barry Murray, forced entry into Stephen Hutton's flat on Charleston Road. Hutton was lying on his couch when the group entered. A 20-minute assault happened without any warnings. They used a hammer to assault the victim, including references to kneecapping. At some point during the attack, Hutton was stabbed directly through the heart. After the attack, the 4 offenders fled the flat, leaving Stephen Hutton critically injured, but they didn't call emergency services. Police Scotland were called to the scene on Charleston Road at around 11 o'clock in the evening on March the 30th. Mr. Hutton was taken to Ninewells Hospital, where he died the following morning. A homicide investigation led by Detective Inspector Richard Baird began. Officers examined the flat, documenting extensive blood evidence and signs of a violent struggle across multiple rooms. Forensic analysis linked weapons used during the assault to the injuries sustained. Witness statements and digital evidence helped establish the movements of the 4 accused before and after the attack. Barry Murray was arrested on April the 2nd, 2024, followed by the arrest of Scott Henderson on April the 3rd, 2024. Brian Miller and Carri Stewart were arrested later and charged with murder. At the High Court in Glasgow, each denied responsibility, attempting to shift blame among themselves. But the jury rejected these accounts. Prosecutors outlined the extreme and prolonged violence involved. Stewart was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum punishment period of 20 years, which was the same as her accomplices. Stephen Hutton's mother attended court daily, maintaining quiet dignity. Her victim impact statement described the profound and lasting loss of her only son. From this case, these are the lessons that emerge. Violence can escalate with alarming speed when addiction and personal instability are left unchallenged. Even after a relationship ends, former partners may remain dangerously exposed to harm. When responsibility is shared within a group, individual restraint can weaken, allowing brutality to intensify beyond what a single person might carry out alone. This case shows how ordinary settings can become scenes of irreversible harm when warning signs are ignored. Second offender, Siobhan Russell. September the 4th, 2016, Ballantrae Place, Dundee, Scotland. A long-running dispute spilled into the street, where a brief confrontation ended with shocking consequences for a woman. Siobhan Russell, 31 years old, lived in Dundee and was a mother of 2 children, and she had a history of depression, drug dependency, and ongoing mental health difficulties. The victim was Marie Lowe, 36 years old, a mother of 4 and a grandmother-to-be. She was known to Russell through an ongoing dispute, reportedly involving a debt of £10. Earlier in September 4, 2016, tensions between Siobhan Russell and Marie Lowe had already escalated following earlier police involvement. Later that day, Marie Lowe arrived outside Russell's home in Ballantrae Place, accompanied by her pregnant daughter, in connection with the continuing disagreement. Shortly afterwards, Russell came out of her flat armed with a knife, shouting as she confronted Marie Lowe in the street. A brief struggle followed, during which Russell pulled the victim's hair and then struck with the blade. As a result, Marie Lowe sustained a single stab wound that penetrated her heart and collapsed onto the pavement. After Marie Lowe fell to the ground, witnesses saw Russell remain close, holding the knife near the victim's head or throat. However, when the victim's older daughter intervened, Russell withdrew and returned to her flat. Emergency services were then contacted, and Marie Lowe was taken to hospital, where she died several hours later from her injuries. Police Scotland launched a homicide investigation and established that officers had been called to the same location the day before the fatal incident. Forensic examination of Russell's home led to the discovery of a knife hidden under the kitchen sink. Analysis showed Russell's DNA on the handle and Marie Lowe's DNA on the blade. Witness statements, including accounts from family members present at the scene, formed a central part of the case. Russell was initially charged with murder. During the investigation and pre-trial period, she was released on bail on 2 occasions. At the High Court in Edinburgh, prosecutors described the attack as unprovoked and involving a lethal weapon. The jury rejected Russell's claim of self-defense and convicted her of culpable homicide. She was sentenced to 5.5 years imprisonment. Marie Lowe's family described their devastation. Her daughter spoke of lasting trauma, while her parents publicly questioned the length of the sentence imposed. This case underscores how brief encounters, shaped by unresolved conflict, can leave consequences that extend far beyond a single moment. Third offender, Victoria Kydd. December 2, 2005, Blackness Road, Dundee, Scotland. An argument inside a shared flat escalated late at night, ending with a fatal injury and a relationship that would never be resolved. Victoria Kydd, 28 years old, lived in Dundee, Scotland, and had been in a long and unstable relationship with her partner. She had struggled with depression and alcohol-related issues, factors considered during sentencing. The victim was John Lofthouse, 32 years old, Kydd's boyfriend, and the couple had been together for approximately 5 years. Friends described the relationship as stormy, marked by frequent arguments but also plans for a shared future. Earlier in December 2, 2005, an ongoing argument between Victoria Kydd and John Lofthouse escalated throughout the evening, briefly pausing when he left the flat before resuming upon his return. The disagreement formed part of ongoing tensions within their relationship. During the dispute, Mr. Lofthouse left the flat and went out to licensed premises. While he was away, Kydd remained inside the flat. When Mr. Lofthouse later returned, the argument resumed and quickly intensified. Despite attempts to calm the situation, the confrontation continued and emotions escalated further. Following this renewed argument, Kydd went into the kitchen area, where she picked up a knife while preparing food. She then stood in the kitchen doorway holding the knife as Mr. Lofthouse approached from another room. In the moments that followed, Mr. Lofthouse sustained a single stab wound to the chest. As a result of that injury, Mr. Lofthouse collapsed onto the floor of the flat. Shortly afterwards, Kydd contacted ambulance control and requested assistance. Emergency services attended the address, but despite their efforts, Mr. Lofthouse was dead at the scene, having been stabbed through the heart. Police officers attended the flat on Blackness Road and quickly established that Kydd was the only other person present at the time of the incident. She was questioned at the scene and later by detectives. During the investigation, Kydd stated that Mr. Lofthouse had assaulted her earlier in the argument. Officers recovered the knife used in the incident and documented the scene. As a result, Kydd was charged with murder. At the High Court in Edinburgh, Kydd pleaded guilty to culpable homicide, and the original charge of murder was withdrawn. The judge considered the lack of premeditation and the circumstances of the domestic dispute. She was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. John Lofthouse's family had been left devastated by his death and the sudden loss of a son and partner. This case illustrates how private arguments, when left unchecked, can end in permanent loss within ordinary domestic settings. Fourth offender, Elizabeth Reid. May 1, 2012, Provost Road, Dundee, Scotland. A drinking session between acquaintances descended into violence inside a flat, ending with an unbelievable event. Elizabeth Reid, 58 years old, lived in Dundee and was known for chronic alcohol abuse, severely damaging her life. She had a very bad temper and appeared detached from emotion, showing little understanding of the consequences of her actions. The victim was John White, 50 years old. They knew each other well and frequently drank together. Their association was characterized by regular arguments, often fueled by alcohol. Earlier in May 1st, 2012, Elizabeth Reid and John White were drinking together inside a flat on Provost Road in Dundee. As the evening progressed, alcohol consumption increased and tension began to rise between them, led to an argument inside the flat. As the dispute escalated, John White threw a cup of alcohol over Reid. Immediately afterwards, Reid moved away from him and went into the kitchen area of the flat and then returned with a knife. Shortly thereafter, Reid confronted White again, and during the continuing disturbance, she stabbed him. The wound caused irreparable damage to a main artery in his neck. Following the stabbing, Reid returned the knife to a cupboard in the kitchen. As a result of the injury, White collapsed inside the flat. Emergency services were contacted following reports of a disturbance. Paramedics attended and attempted to provide treatment, but despite their efforts, John White died at the scene from his injuries. Police Scotland attended the flat on Provost Road on the same day. Reid admitted her actions from the outset, including to emergency responders. Officers established their relationship, and investigators recovered the knife used in the assault from the kitchen cupboard. Detective Inspector Mike Pyrie later stated that the case demonstrated how the combination of alcohol and knives could become lethal. Reid was arrested that day and charged with murder. At the High Court in Glasgow, Reid denied murder but was convicted by a majority verdict. The mandatory sentence of life imprisonment was imposed, with a minimum punishment period of 13 years. The court acknowledged the loss of John White's life, but no detailed family statements were made public during sentencing. This case shows how familiar environments can become lethal when conflict replaces restraint. Fifth offender, Leanne Gunning. January 31st, 2024, Adamson Court, Lochie, Dundee, Scotland. A masked group forced entry into a flat at night with a planned robbery by force, but everything didn't end there. Leanne Gunning, 40 years old, was from Dundee and had previously lived at Dudhope Court with a criminal record, and that drug misuse had been a feature of her life. She acted as part of a group and was not alone in carrying out the offense. The victim was Hayter Duncan, the occupant of the flat that was targeted. He had no established relationship with Gunning or her accomplices. During the late evening of January 31st, 2024, Leanne Gunning, acting with Kenneth Fraser, John Wallace, and others, travelled to Adamson Court in the Lochie area of Dundee. Their purpose was to carry out a robbery. Shortly afterwards, the group forced entry into Hayter Duncan's flat. At the time, Duncan was in bed, and most of the intruders were masked as they entered the property. Once inside, the group immediately launched a violent assault. Gunning and her accomplices repeatedly struck Duncan on the head and body using a range of weapons, leaving the victim severely injured. Following the assault, the group took £600 in cash and an electric scooter from the flat. They then fled the scene, leaving Duncan injured and alone inside his home. After the attackers had gone, Duncan managed to contact a Dundee Council employee. During the call, he reported that he had been badly beaten and asked for both police and an ambulance to be called. Emergency services later attended, and Duncan received medical treatment for injuries that placed his life in danger and caused permanent disfigurement. Police Scotland quickly launched an investigation into the attack. Officers documented the injuries sustained by the victim and gathered statements regarding the forced entry and robbery. During the investigation and subsequent trial, video footage was produced, which showed the level of planning involved in the offence. The evidence demonstrated that the attack was not spontaneous but organised in advance. Gunning, Wallace, and Fraser were identified as participants and were charged with attempted murder and robbery. At the High Court in Edinburgh, Gunning denied the charges, but the jury returned majority verdicts of guilty. The judge described the offence as horrific, and Gunning was sentenced to 7 years and 8 months imprisonment, with a further 2 years of supervision on release. The victim's distress following the attack was noted during proceedings, reflecting the lasting physical and psychological impact of the assault. This case shows how coordinated decisions, carried out in minutes, can leave permanent consequences for victims long after the attackers have left the scene. Sixth offender, Karen Hayter. September 25th, 2022, Fairhurst Walk, Dundee, Scotland. A minor collision late at night escalated into a dangerous flight, leaving a member of the public seriously injured. Karen Hayter, 50 years old, lived in Dundee as a grandmother. The case did not arise from a prior dispute, but from events that unfolded spontaneously after a road traffic incident. The victim was Mark McIntyre, a member of the public. He had no prior relationship with Hayter. He became involved only after witnessing a collision and attempting to prevent the driver from leaving the scene. At around 11 o'clock in the evening, on September the 25th, 2022, Karen Hayter was driving in the Fairhurst Walk area of Dundee when her car clipped a parked vehicle. Shortly afterwards, Mark McIntyre, who was outside a nearby address, approached and attempted to stop her from leaving, believing she intended to flee without reporting the damage. Instead of stopping, Hayter attempted to drive away. As she moved forward, McIntyre positioned himself on the bonnet in an effort to avoid being struck and to prevent her departure. Despite this, Hayter accelerated and continued driving with him clinging to the front of the vehicle. As she proceeded, she drove erratically and increased speed, carrying McIntyre for more than 500 yards from Fairhurst Walk onto Drumlanrig Drive. During this time, he remained on the bonnet as the vehicle continued through residential streets. Eventually, on Val Green Court, Hayter swerved sharply. As a result, McIntyre was thrown from the bonnet onto the roadway. He sustained serious injuries upon impact. Following this, Hayter continued driving, abandoned her car near a supermarket, and took a taxi home without reporting the incident. Police Scotland launched an investigation later that night. Officers gathered statements from the victim and witnesses and reviewed CCTV footage capturing the incident and the vehicle's movements. The footage confirmed the timeline of the incident. The evidence charged Hayter with causing serious injury by dangerous driving and with failing to stop and report an accident. At Dundee Sheriff Court, Hayter denied the charges, claiming fear for her safety. The jury rejected this account and found her guilty. She was sentenced to 14 months imprisonment and disqualified from driving for 5 years and 7 months. Mark McIntyre was visibly distressed in court following the verdict, breaking down as the jury's decision was delivered. This case demonstrates how a momentary decision to escape accountability can result in lasting harm for both victim and offender. 7th offender, Tandy Swinton. April the 15th, 2024. Dryburgh Gardens, Dundee, Scotland. An elderly man was confronted in his own home, and a brief encounter led to injuries from which he never recovered. Tandy Swinton was a 44-year-old Dundee woman with an extensive criminal record of 26 previous convictions, including offences involving drugs, theft, assault, robbery, and repeated breaches of court orders with no accomplices. The victim was William Lambie, 97 years old, was a frail pensioner who lived independently, despite significant physical vulnerability, with 5 feet 1 inch tall, and weighed approximately 5 stone at the time of his death. He had previously been targeted by Swinton during a robbery several years earlier. Earlier on April the 15th, 2024, Tandy Swinton went to William Lambie's flat at Dryburgh Gardens in Dundee, and once inside the property, she demanded money from him, but when Lambie did not comply, Swinton pushed him on the body. As a result, the 97-year-old man fell heavily to the floor. The fall caused serious internal injuries. Tandy Swinton then fled the apartment, leaving Mr. Lambie, who was seriously injured, alone and without contacting any emergency services. Mr. Lambie called for help himself, using a community alarm system worn around his neck. Lambie was then taken to Ninewells Hospital, where he underwent surgery, then he was transferred for rehabilitation. However, his condition continued to deteriorate, and he was later moved to a nursing home, but on May the 26th, 2024, more than a month after the assault, William Lambie died as a result of the injuries he had sustained during the fall. Police Scotland opened an investigation after William Lambie's death. Officers gathered medical evidence documenting the progression of his condition. Investigators interviewed witnesses and individuals who had contact with Lambie in the period surrounding the incident. During inquiries, police established that Swinton had attended the address shortly before Lambie's health rapidly deteriorated. Background checks revealed that Swinton had previously targeted Lambie during a robbery in April 2020, during which threats of serious violence had been made. This earlier conviction was placed before the court as part of the evidential context. Police also examined Swinton's wider criminal history, identifying a pattern of offending that included targeting elderly residents in the same area. On the basis of the medical findings, witness testimony, and Swinton's prior conduct, prosecutors authorized a charge of murder. At the High Court in Edinburgh, the jury acquitted Swinton of murder, but convicted her of culpable homicide. The judge noted her extensive criminal history and the increasing seriousness of her offending. Swinton was remanded in custody pending sentencing at the High Court in Glasgow. Following the preparation of background reports, the court acknowledged the suffering of those closest to William Lambie. Friends described him as a devout Christian who lived quietly and was well regarded within his community. This case shows how a brief confrontation, directed at the vulnerable, can result in consequences that unfold slowly but end in irreversible loss. Final offender, Morgan Yorston. September 3, 2020, Dundee and Tayside, Scotland. A prolonged drugs investigation exposed an organised supply network, ending with an event that shocked everyone. Morgan Yorston, also known as Morag Yorston, 55 years old, played a significant role in an organised crime group involved in the supply of Class A drugs. There were multiple co-accused in the wider operation, and her actions were part of coordinated criminal activity rather than an isolated offence. With no identifiable victim, the harm was directed at the wider community of Dundee and Tayside, particularly vulnerable individuals affected by the supply of heroin and cocaine during a period of high drug-related deaths. Between July and October 2018, Morgan was involved in the supply of Class A controlled drugs in Dundee as part of an organised crime group. During that period, large quantities of heroin and cocaine were handled within the network operating in the city. The criminal activity continued over those months, and the drugs were intended for distribution within Dundee and the wider Tayside area. Police Scotland conducted a joint Tayside Division and Organised Crime Unit investigation known as Operation Boost. As the inquiry developed, officers carried out targeted operations which led to the recovery of approximately 6 kilograms of heroin and 1 kilogram of cocaine, together valued at over £380,000, as well as £12,000 in cash. Yorston was arrested as part of the wider operation, which involved 17 arrests in total. In July 2019, Yorston pleaded guilty to supplying heroin and cocaine and to involvement in serious organised crime. However, in September 2019, while on bail, she failed to appear at the High Court in Glasgow for sentencing and fled Scotland with her husband to Bulgaria. A European arrest warrant was granted, and on March 4, 2020, Bulgarian authorities executed the warrant and arrested her. At the High Court in Glasgow, Yorston pleaded guilty to supplying heroin and cocaine and to involvement in serious organised crime. The court imposed a sentence of 5 years and 11 months imprisonment, reflecting both the scale of the operation and her significant role within it. Police welcomed the sentence as a clear message that organised crime groups supplying drugs to Dundee would be pursued and disrupted, regardless of attempts to evade justice. From this case, these are the lessons that emerge. Organised crime causes widespread harm beyond individual offenders. Drug supply networks exploit vulnerable communities. Fleeing justice only deepens consequences rather than avoiding them. This case demonstrates how sustained investigation and international cooperation can bring organised offenders back to face accountability, even after they attempt to disappear. Across these cases, one pattern repeats: choices made in moments of pressure leave consequences that never fully fade. It grows quietly inside homes, relationships, and everyday streets until a single moment changes everything. Behind every headline is a real person, real consequences, and questions that still linger long after the courtrooms fall silent. If you want more true, verified British crime stories told with care, context, and purpose, make sure you subscribe to UK Real Crime and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. We release new cases regularly, and some stories are more unsettling than you might expect.